NATO squadron approaches Crimea, pushing Poland to face Russian fire. EU in disarray due to lack of funds, Qatar cuts off gas. Greetings to ladies and gentlemen watching Sai Gon TV channel, where the hottest news is summarized in the most intense few minutes. The world is bracing itself for a rapid succession of events like a global storm. A Ukrainian soldier shot his commander dead, then dropped his weapon and surrendered to Russia. NATO deployed a squadron near Crimea, simulating missile launches into Russian territory. Polish Prime Minister warns of war in the next 2 years. And Qatar threatens to cut off gas to all of Europe if Brussels doesn't become less arrogant. Europe, the Middle East, East Asia, all are fuming. Tensions spread from the trenches to the boardrooms. From high-speed trains to central bank headquarters, today's news will take you through all those hotspots, in just a few breathtaking minutes. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any important developments. The earthquake in the trenches. Ukrainian soldier shot his commander, then surrendered to Russia. A shocking incident just occurred on the eastern Ukrainian battlefield, the most brutal front of the conflict with Russia. A Ukrainian soldier suddenly opened fire, killing his commander right in the barracks, then voluntarily laid down his weapon and surrendered to the Russian army. This information was revealed by the Telegram channel, Russian Spring War Correspondent. Accordingly, this soldier was originally a civilian, with no intention of bearing arms. However, one ordinary morning, while on his way to work, he was suddenly stopped by local recruitment forces. This unit operates like a conscription office, coercively, without much procedure. He was taken for rapid training, and after a few weeks, sent straight to the Donbass battlefield. At the front line, psychological pressure, fatigue, and accumulated dissatisfaction exploded into conflict. The young soldier constantly clashed with his squad leader, who was accused of frequently threatening, insulting, and even using violence against soldiers. After a heated argument, the situation spiraled out of control. The soldier drew his gun, shot his commander directly, and then continued firing at some other comrades who tried to intervene. Immediately after the incident, instead of fleeing or resisting, the soldier immediately advanced towards the Russian front line, raising his hands to surrender. In the initial interrogation, he stated he had no regrets about his actions, believing it was the only way to survive. The incident is not just a personal tragedy but also reflects the severe tension and cracks within the Ukrainian military, especially amidst the prolonged waves of forced mobilization. When the fighting spirit does not stem from belief but only from fear, even a small spark can ignite a tragedy. Donbass is not just a front between Russia and Ukraine, but also a place that exposes the biggest cracks within soldiers' psyches, where a bullet can not only target the enemy but also turn back and pierce through one's own ranks. NATO deploys squadron near Crimea, Moscow rounds up war boundaries. Tensions in the Black Sea region have just escalated to a new level as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, unexpectedly conducted a large-scale air exercise near the Crimean Peninsula. The territory that Russia annexed from Ukraine in 2014. Taking place on July 27, the exercise mobilized a series of top assets from NATO member countries. These included the British RC-135W electronic reconnaissance aircraft, specialized in collecting enemy radar signals and data, the French E-3F early warning aircraft, dubbed the Eye in the Sky, along with 6 tactical fighter jets of unidentified nationality. Particularly concerning is that the RC-135W flew close to the Crimean Peninsula, with a distance of only 40 kilometers, a figure sufficient for Moscow to consider it a precursor to a preemptive strike. According to reports, simulated scenarios in the exercise included destroying ground targets with cruise missiles, meaning simulating attacks on Russian territory with high-precision weapons. This immediately sparked a wave of criticism from the Kremlin. The president of the Russian Naval Academy, Nikolai Patrushev, warned that this is not merely an exercise. This is an action that pushes the region into a direct confrontation with the risk of spiraling out of control. Military analysts believe that NATO's actions have a dual meaning, both a show of force to deter Moscow and an attempt to force Russia to divide its forces, in a context where the Ukrainian battlefield is developing unfavorably for Kiev. Forcing Russia to stretch its air defense systems from Donbass to Crimea could be a key objective in the West's strategy to extend the front line. However, even the smallest miscalculation in such close approaches could completely ignite a direct confrontation between the world's 2 largest military powers, NATO and Russia. And if that happens, the Black Sea will no longer be a strategic waterway, but will turn into a global flashpoint. Polish Prime Minister warns that war in Europe could break out in the next 2 years. Amidst escalating global tensions, a shocking warning has just echoed from the heart of Europe. Poland and the entire continent need to prepare for the possibility of war breaking out with Russia within the next 2 years, a statement made by Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk himself, which sent shivers down the spines of both Brussels and Berlin. The warning was issued just hours after Tusk held a private meeting with General Alexis Greenowitz, Supreme Allied Commander Europe of NATO Allied Forces. Right in the capital, Warsaw. Without mincing words, Tusk stated directly that the Polish people must be ready for all scenarios. Within the next 2 years, Europe could face a serious military incident that no one anticipates. Prime Minister Tusk's statement is not isolated. It aligns with recent assessments revealed by some Western intelligence agencies, which warn that both Russia and China are quietly preparing for a large-scale conflict by 2027. It is noteworthy that Poland, with its geostrategic position bordering Kaliningrad and Belarus, will almost certainly become NATO's front line if a crisis erupts. With a population of nearly 40 million and a military force undergoing strong rearmament, Poland no longer wants to stand on the sidelines. From 2022 until now, the country's government has continuously increased defense spending, acquiring numerous armaments from the US and South Korea, and even initiating a semi-professional militia training program. According to analysts, Tusk's statement is not just an internal warning but also aims to awaken all of Europe, where many countries, especially in Western Europe, are still complacent in peace. EU in disarray over 2.35 trillion budget package. Germany and France are at the table but not aligned. As Europe braces itself against security pressures from the East, another battle, simmering but no less fierce, has erupted within the bloc itself. The biggest budget battle in a decade. The European Commission (EC) has just announced its draft budget for the 2028-2034 period, totaling up to €2 trillion, equivalent to approximately $2.35 trillion. The stated goals are ambitious: promoting economic recovery, accelerating green transition, strengthening border control, and reinforcing internal cohesion. But the greater the ambition, the fiercer the reaction. Immediately after the announcement, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden simultaneously raised their flags of protest. These countries are concerned that the enormous budget will put pressure on national finances, eroding the foundation of domestic revenue and expenditure balance, which is already strained after the pandemic and energy crisis. A German finance official even quipped, "Europe is planning to build a castle, while the foundations in Berlin are not yet dry." As for France, a country in a fiscally weak position, it is caught in a spiral of internal politics. The government was forced to present a spending cut plan worth €404 billion to bring the deficit below 3% of GDP by 2029. However, that effort is on the verge of failure due to insufficient votes in parliament. The polarized political situation in Paris means that any austerity measure faces fierce opposition. Some sources from Brussels indicate that the EC is under pressure to revise its proposal. After facing criticism that the plan was disorganized and unrealistic, internal divisions have once again emerged in Europe, precisely when the world needs them to demonstrate the most unity. At a time when Russia is increasing its influence and China continues to make large investments in global infrastructure, a Europe divided by money may have to pay the price with its own geopolitical standing. Qatar issues ultimatum: EU wants gas, must go easy on Middle Eastern businesses. A geopolitical warning shot has just been fired by Qatar at Europe, and this time not with words, but with an extremely potent soft weapon: liquefied natural gas (LNG). In a letter officially sent to the Belgian government on July 21, Qatar's Minister of Energy frankly stated, "If the European Union does not adjust its corporate due diligence standards on human rights and environment, Doha will seriously consider redirecting LNG supplies to more friendly and stable markets." With its position as the largest LNG exporter, only after the US and Australia, Qatar currently supplies 12 to 14% of Europe's total annual LNG consumption, a figure that cannot be underestimated, especially after the EU almost completely cut off supplies from Russia since 2022. Therefore, the warning from Doha is nothing short of an energy bomb dropped on Brussels in the scorching summer, but with the chilling echo of the coming winter. The story originates from the EU's push for the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, requiring large companies operating within the bloc to thoroughly scrutinize their supply chains, including risks of forced labor and global environmental impact. However, Gulf countries, including Qatar, argue that EU standards are too strict, inflexible, and impose Western cultural norms. Qatar believes that if this law is rigidly applied, many large energy and investment corporations could be unfairly excluded from the European market, and Doha will not stand idly by. After more than 30 years of frozen relations, Russia resumes direct flights between Moscow and Pyongyang. A notable turning point has just occurred on the Northeast Asian aviation map. Russia and North Korea have officially resumed direct commercial flights between Moscow and Pyongyang, ending more than 3 decades of interruption. Since the early 1990s, at 7 p.m. local time on July 27, a Boeing 777-200M with the call sign of Northwild Airlines took off from Sheremetyevo International Airport, heading straight for North Korea's Sunan International Airport. The journey lasted 8 hours, and all 440 seats were fully booked. Despite the not so cheap starting price, over 404,000 rubles per ticket. Earlier in June, Russia and North Korea also restored the passenger railway line connecting Moscow and Pyongyang, another symbol of thawing bilateral relations. Although the initial flight frequency is limited to once a month, observers believe this is the beginning of a new wave of cooperation between the two countries, both under Western sanctions. In the context of Russia's economic isolation after the military operation in Ukraine, and North Korea remains outside the global trade system, the connection between Moscow and Pyongyang is not just about transportation, it's also a strong political statement. We still have options, and those options don't require Western permission. Plane fire in the US, high-speed train power outage in Germany, modern infrastructure facing a trial by fire. On July 26, the world witnessed two serious transportation incidents occurring almost simultaneously on two continents. A passenger plane in the US caught fire during takeoff, while in Europe, a modern high-speed train completely lost power in a dark tunnel. The first incident occurred at Denver International Airport, Colorado, USA. An American Airlines Boeing 737 MAX 8, while taxiing for takeoff to Miami, suddenly emitted a loud explosion from beneath the passenger cabin. According to a passenger, "We heard an explosion like a bomb, then saw a wheel roll off the wing of the plane. Immediately after, the emergency braking system was activated and fire started to erupt from the landing gear. The plane immediately had to cease operations, passengers were evacuated urgently, fortunately no one was injured." Also on the same day, in Germany, an intercity express ice high-speed train traveling from Vienna, Austria, to Hamburg, Germany, experienced a severe power outage right inside a tunnel near Vienna. The entire air conditioning and lighting system was disabled, leaving over 400 passengers trapped in hot, dark, and airless conditions for more than 6 hours. A rescue team of 100 people had to work hard to evacuate passengers through emergency exits, bringing all of them back to the capital by bus. 2 of them had to receive immediate first aid on the spot due to fainting from heat stroke. 2 incidents occurring on the same day not only raise an alarm about the fragility of modern transportation infrastructure but also demonstrate that when systems are overloaded or malfunction in extreme weather, all cutting-edge technology can be helpless against seemingly minor incidents. Putin prepares for underwater war, Russian nuclear weapons quietly expand. As the world watches every airstrike in Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin has unexpectedly turned his gaze to the ocean, where another war, quieter but no less dangerous, is quietly taking shape. In Seversk province, during a rare strategic meeting on the Navy, Putin announced plans to enhance global deterrence capabilities by commissioning 4 new-generation nuclear submarines. Part of the Bori project, each is not just a combat vessel but a mobile nuclear base carrying Bulava intercontinental ballistic missiles, capable of wiping out an entire city with a single launch. It is noteworthy that 2 of the 4 submarines have already begun construction. This is no longer a long-term plan, but an order that has been incorporated into the national defense production machinery. The ultimate goal is to build an independent, anti-disruption underwater warfare ecosystem, without relying on any technology chain from the West. For Mr. Putin, the lesson from the Ukrainian battlefield is clear: with just one satellite network disabled, an entire division can become blind on the battlefield. Therefore, Russia is quietly developing a generation of underwater unmanned weapons, sensor robots, unmanned submarines, and especially a completely internal military communication network. Moscow's strategy is no longer to race against the West but to detach itself from dependence, so that if one day it is completely cut off from the world, Russia will still be capable of continuous combat and striking from where the enemy least expects it. The depths of the ocean. And if the West dares to play tricks like satellite signals or technological encirclement, the Kremlin is ready to bang the table and overturn the chessboard from beneath the sea. Trump plays the game of the century. The Putin Zelensky meeting is about to become a reality. As all eyes are focused on the fierce conflict in Ukraine, a figure once considered to be out of the global political arena unexpectedly returns and shakes the entire geopolitical chessboard. Former US President Donald Trump has just signaled that he is facilitating a trilateral meeting between himself, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, potentially taking place in Istanbul, Turkey. At the same time, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan confirmed Ankara is ready to play the role of stage setter for the biggest dialogue since the start of the conflict. A Russia, Ukraine, US meeting could completely change the course of the war or trigger uncontrollable chain reactions. President Zelensky immediately responded, stating frankly that he is ready to meet both leaders at the same time. In war, a leader is only willing to sit at the negotiating table when either they are too desperate, or they are preparing a breakthrough move. The Russian side is more reserved. Putin did not speak publicly, but Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov clearly stated the position. A high-level meeting will only take place if there is thorough preparation and a substantive agenda. In other words, Russia is not coming for a photo op, but to sign documents that will reshape the situation. If the meeting is held, it's not just a diplomatic event. This will be a historic chess game, where three powerful figures own who started the war, one who bears the war, and one who wants to end the war sit at the same table. And with Donald Trump initiating it, observers understand that anything can happen, from peace negotiations to a reversal of the war, even determining the global balance of power. Chilling warning from Hungary: time is no longer on Ukraine's side. As the world discusses the possibility of a Putin, Zelensky, Trump meeting, a sharp, cold voice from the heart of Europe suddenly emerged, like a bucket of cold water poured directly on those who still harbored illusions of military victory. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, long considered a dissenting voice in the EU, went on national television and issued an uncompromising warning: the door to peace is slowly closing. And no one, including the West, has ever defeated a nuclear-armed superpower. A statement that directly challenged the hold-out to the end mindset of Kiev and strategic planners in Brussels or Washington. Mr. Orban didn't just talk. He recalled his bold diplomatic trip in 2024, when he was one of the few leaders who dared to visit both Moscow and Kiev to propose a two-phase ceasefire plan. At that time, Ukraine still had bargaining chips. But Kiev refused, believing that the West would pump enough weapons to achieve a complete victory. Now, according to Orban, time is no longer on Ukraine's side. The battlefield is stalemated, aid is dwindling, public morale is weary, but Kiev still refuses to face reality. Belief in complete military victory is a dangerous illusion. He emphasized that mutual distrust between Russia and Ukraine had killed all previous negotiation opportunities. And with each passing month, the chance for peace becomes more fragile. And the cost of the war is getting more expensive by the day. Not just for Ukraine but for all of Europe, as Putin remains silent. Mr. Trump makes overtures, Mr. Zelensky considers, and Mr. Orban warns that the whole world is watching every slightest sign from the powerful hands, because the war in Ukraine is no longer a conflict between neighbors but a global proxy battlefield. The meeting between the three tigers, Putin, Trump, Zelensky, will either be a struggle for territory or a joint elephant hunt. And Istanbul, which has witnessed historic peace talks, will it become the stage for the game of the century? Or will it pave the way for a new, fiercer confrontation? The unexpected shift of the West Ukraine is no longer an irreversible priority. At a recent NATO summit, a symbolic but little-noticed change occurred. The phrase "irreversible path for Ukraine's accession to the military bloc" was quietly removed from the joint statement. This is not a minor detail, it is a clear sign that Ukraine is no longer at the top of the West's strategic priorities. Instead, Kiev is gradually becoming a political burden, a thorny problem that many member states are beginning to re-evaluate their commitment to. It's not just a matter of words. Countries like Hungary, Finland, and even the Czech Republic have openly expressed their opposition to continuing unconditional aid to Ukraine. These countries have their own reasons, from political views and domestic pressure to fatigue with the war dragging on without an end in sight. The consensus, which was NATO's greatest strength, is now clearly eroding, creating policy gaps that are difficult to fill. Across social media platforms, a series of heartbreaking stories are spreading rapidly. Young soldiers are forced into barracks in what are called forced conscription camps, and their relatives cannot help but cry out in despair. An exasperated Kiev resident shared, "We send our children to the battlefield, while his children put aid money into their own pockets." That is no longer a sudden outburst of anger but has transformed into deep despair, a shattering of the trust that people have placed in their government and international allies for many years. As resources become scarce, social organizations weaken, and internal discontent spreads, Ukraine's domestic front appears to be becoming as tense as the battlefield outside. Once hailed as a symbol of democracy and hope for change, President Zelensky is now facing serious accusations. He is seen as a manipulator of the law, a leader clinging to power at all costs and concealing corrupt practices within his own administration. Serbia sets conditions for sanctioning Russia: "If you want me to sacrifice, give me a place." A small Balkan nation has just left all of Brussels stunned. Serbia, a name often considered by the West as a guest on the fringes of the EU, has just made a diplomatic move that left the entire European Union bloc pale. On July 25, Neman Djistorovic, Serbia's State Secretary for European Integration, threw a statement like a ticking bomb directly onto the table of EU leaders. Serbia will only agree to sanction Russia if Brussels shows a real, concrete, and irreversible commitment to EU membership. The statement was not flowery, not veiled, and most importantly, no longer accepted being sidelined. For the past 3 years, Serbia has been continuously pressured to choose sides between Russia and the West, but Belgrade has resolutely maintained neutrality. Not because they blindly adore the Kremlin, but because they understand. This is a chess game where one wrong move could lead to the complete collapse of the economy. Sanctions won't harm Russia much, but they will collapse the entire Serbian economy, Storovic stated decisively. A statement like a knife cutting through the glossy paint of European unity, and he was not wrong. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Croatia, a neighboring country and EU member, received over 22 billion euros in aid from Brussels, while Serbia received a mere 165 million, a cold slap to the face of the trust that the EU had worked so hard to cultivate. Why should Serbia sacrifice its national interests? For sanctions they have no right to comment on, no share of support, and certainly no commitment to their future. Belgrade has run out of patience. Serbia refuses to continue being an overnight in a house for which they hold no key. If Europe wants Serbia to sacrifice its traditional relationship with Russia, it must prove that Serbia is a worthy member, not just on paper, but in terms of actual benefits and long-term strategic vision. That's not a bargain, that's a warning. And it's confusing all of Europe. Russia is Serbia's existential ally. The EU can only dream of tying Belgrade's hands. To understand Serbia's stance today, one cannot ignore the deep-rooted, both historical and geopolitical, relationship between Belgrade and Moscow. Serbia is not just a small Eastern European country seeking entry into Europe, but also a nation with deep memories of Russia's companionship in moments of life and death. Both nations are closely bound by Orthodox Christian culture, by blood-stained pages of history in the fiery Balkan Wars. But deeper than that is the trust forged over decades. When the whole world turned its back, only Russia remained. The Kosovo issue is the clearest example. When the West pushed for the unilateral recognition of Kosovo's independence, Russia was one of the rare countries that resolutely refused to recognize it, and used its veto power in the Security Council to block all legitimization efforts. For Serbia, that was not just support, but a vital strategic shield. President Aleksandar Vučić has repeatedly affirmed Serbia's opposition to sanctioning Russia. But he also does not completely rule out the possibility of a pivot if national interests demand it. However, do not mistake that for being easily manipulated. Serbia does not act according to slogans of European values, Western freedom, or international morality, which are often used as a facade for geopolitical calculations. On the contrary, Serbia acts as a nation that knows its position well, and will never sacrifice relations with a strategic ally just to appease those who have never shared risks with them. The EU can pressure Serbia with integration commitments, financial aid packages, or promises of a seat in the European House. But Belgrade will not let its hands be tied before Moscow, which once saved them from isolation. For Serbia, Russia is not just a partner, but the last protector in an uncertain world. EU's dilemma: embrace Serbia or push it into Russia's arms. Serbia today is like a small boat in a turbulent ocean, pulled in two opposite directions. On one side is the promising, but indecisive, European Union bloc. On the other side is Russia, both familiar and steadfast. But the paradox is that Europe itself, through its hesitation and arrogance, is quietly pushing Serbia towards what it fears most: Moscow's embrace. Brussels understands well that if it wants to control the Balkans, a region with many geopolitical risks, then Serbia is the key. A pro-EU Serbia could help the bloc build a strategic barrier to halt Russia's deep influence into Europe. But a Serbia that is abandoned, disregarded and treated as a perpetual guest, will sooner or later return to its old friend Moscow, which always welcomes it with both affection and practical benefits. Meanwhile, the EU continues to roll out successive sanction packages. Most recently, the 18th sanctions package, hailed as a blow to Russia's Achilles heel. From the Nord Stream pipeline to the oil price cap. However, their actual effectiveness is increasingly being questioned. While Europe struggles with inflation, energy crises, and political divisions, Russia quietly expands its influence into Asia, the Middle East, and even Africa. Moscow no longer needs the European market as it once did, and that makes Brussels sanctions nothing more than a dull knife swung in desperation. If Brussels continues to evade Serbia, failing to provide a clear integration roadmap with tangible mutual benefits, then sooner or later Serbia will return to the East, not out of sentiment, but out of existential reality. And then, Europe will lose not only a potential ally, but also strategic control over the entire Balkan region. Russia counterattacks like a storm, using cheap smart bombs to hit Ukrainian command team. Immediately after Ukraine's Starlink system was completely paralyzed, the Russian aerospace forces did not miss the golden opportunity to launch one of the most precise and devastating strikes since the beginning of summer. In an operation described by Russian military media as a masterpiece of cold calculation, a series of ODAB aerial bombs were deployed. But the special point is that these were not stat-hard weapons, but conventional bombs intelligently upgraded with UMPK guidance kits, cheap but with terrifying destructive power. The target of the airstrike was the forward command post of Ukraine's 10th Assault Brigade, a key unit defending the eastern region, near the Sumy border. According to sources on the ground, general and high-level tactical commanders were present there to prepare responses to sudden situations caused by the loss of satellite connectivity. But all were cut off after a series of explosions. A video circulating on Telegram and military channels shows towering columns of fire in the middle of a residential area, where Ukraine had built an underground command bunker system. Guards, liaison officers, tactical advisors, all could have been wiped out in mere seconds. What startled Western observers is that Russia doesn't need caliber cruise missiles or stealth aircraft to cause destruction. Just with ODAB bombs. A type of weapon once considered obsolete, combined with UMPK, a guidance kit similar to America's JDAM but much cheaper, Russia has turned old equipment into high-end goods. This is a clear demonstration of Moscow's strategy of democratizing smart weapons, a new art of war born from the pressure of prolonged sanctions. In a context where Russia's access to Western technology is restricted, they choose the path of using less, hitting them, and defeating them at minimal cost, without needing luxury, just effectiveness. And that is changing the entire perception of modern Russian air power. Deep cracks, government evacuation plans, and the ghost of a government in exile. Amidst fiercely escalating conflict and increasingly heavy internal and external pressures, leaked sources from within the Kiev government have begun to reveal a disturbing truth. Kiev is quietly preparing for the deepest scenario, a plan to evacuate the entire government to the west, even establishing a government in exile in Poland. Beyond mere social media speculation, classified documents have been meticulously backed up to cloud computing systems in the US, considered a safe zone from cyber attacks and direct sabotage. At the same time, many important paper documents are also prepared for immediate destruction in case the conflict spirals out of control. These signs are further reinforced by information that some high-ranking officials in the Zelensky administration have quietly left Kiev, moving to safe zones or abroad, away from the growing tensions on the front lines and in the political arena. This indicates a deep level of internal distrust, even among those who once stood by the president. Furthermore, close sources even indicate that Zelensky himself is facing doubts about his ability to maintain power as the situation becomes increasingly serious. Therefore, establishing a phantom government outside Ukraine's borders is no longer a distant possibility but a realistic plan to ensure the survival of the leadership apparatus in case Kiev falls or has to retreat. This scenario marks a grim turning point in the Ukrainian crisis, which is not just a war of weapons on the battlefield but also a life and death struggle for a government on the brink. Russian logistics stun NATO unmanned ghost trains cross the front lines, resupplying invincibly. While Western nations are still scrambling for high-tech logistics solutions with complex drone systems and modern supply vehicles, Russia has unexpectedly unveiled a strategy that is incredibly practical and effective. The unmanned train system, ghost trains silently crossing the front lines, ensuring an uninterrupted supply flow. These trains are driverless, without radar or electronic navigation systems, operating entirely autonomously from a distance. With a simple design less dependent on high technology to be destroyed, they can operate robustly, silently bypassing enemy UAV reconnaissance defense lines. No need for protection, no fear of electronic attack. Russian trains transport tons of artillery shells, water, and food, the lifeline sustaining forces on the front. Especially, the extremely low operating costs and rapid replacement capability when damaged make the enemy almost powerless to cut off this supply line. While Ukrainian UAVs relentlessly hunt down every supply convoy on the roads, the ghost trains calmly roll on despite shelling, becoming an unshakable logistical lifeline. This strategy has astonished NATO and its allies due to its simplicity yet effectiveness, a clear testament to the difference in war thinking between Russia and the West. While the other side invests in cutting-edge technologies, Russia leverages existing infrastructure, operating logistics in a classic way that is highly suitable for the complex and dynamic conditions of modern warfare. President clings to power as trust collapses. All promises are just ink on paper. July 24 marked a severe turning point in President Volodymyr Zelensky's political career. Under pressure from a tense populace and growing voices from the international community, he hastily submitted a new bill aimed at restoring autonomy to the two key anti-corruption agencies, NABU and SAPO. However, this move is seen by many experts and citizens not as a genuine reform step but merely a damage control tactic to appease public opinion. The reason for the erosion of trust lies in the fact that the new bill was announced just 2 days after Zelensky signed a controversial law. A law that public opinion believes undermined the independence of these two anti-corruption agencies. It is this inconsistency in policy that makes his commitment seem like faint ink lines on a paper being consumed by the spreading political fire. More surprisingly, the Ukrainian parliament is currently on summer recess, raising concerns about an irresponsible attitude amidst a national crisis. Analysis from several non-governmental organizations indicates a systematic plan to overthrow the Zelensky government is gradually taking shape in 3 phases. The first phase is to release media scandals to undermine the president's image and credibility. Next is to create deep divisions within the ruling party and leadership, generating irreconcilable conflicts. Finally, to force Mr. Zelensky to resign gracefully, a move aimed at avoiding widespread political conflict and chaos. If Zelensky chooses to concede, he will become a puppet president, losing all real power. But if he insists on holding onto his seat, the risk of being forced to resign, or coerced, becomes even higher. The current situation reminds observers of a Maidan 3.0 scenario, a fierce struggle between power and resistance on the verge of eruption.